Despite being born in St. Louis, Missouri, Allie Kostiel had always desired to attend the University of Mississippi. She thought her life couldn't have gotten much better when she was finally granted this chance, but then things changed. According to investigators, Allie's life was brutally cut short on that warm July afternoon, and there were no signs or pieces of evidence that could have alerted her companions. When detectives got to the crime site, they were baffled as to how someone could have hurt such a well-mannered, laid-back kid. However, at that point, they narrowed in on their main suspect, a different student with a covert plan that nobody could have predicted. This is the terrible story of Allie Kostiel. Come and join us as we unravel this horrific crime. In 2019, Allie Kostiel, a student at Mississippi State University in Oxford, Mississippi, was 21 years old. The town of Oxford, Mississippi is quite small. Nothing much is happening there. Other than a few eateries and outdoor retailers like Tractor Supply, the town didn't have much to offer. With barely 25,000 residents, it's a charming little town that's quite calm and ideal for college students to live in because there isn't much difficulty to be had in such a small, laid-back community. The town's greatest attraction is the University of Mississippi, and it's safe to infer that the college also provides the majority of the town's revenue. The university has an acceptance rate of around 90%, but the reason most people go here is likely because its tuition is relatively low compared to other similar schools. And with a graduation rate of about 65%, it fits right in line with schools that may cost 10 times as much, while offering what is essentially the exact same education. This is likely why Allie Kostiel was so determined to attend the University of Mississippi. A great school, a great price, and usually great people. Allie was going to college with the intention of earning a marketing degree. Because she had been attending summer school in addition to her regular college courses, she was expected to graduate in the spring of 2020, which was significantly earlier than many of her friends and peers. Allie had aspirations of working in the fashion sector, although she never explicitly said in public what kind of fashion marketing position she was aiming for. Allie, however, was more than just an average student at the University of Mississippi. There are very few people who can ever equal her intense passion. In addition to being the president of the school's golf club, Allie had assisted in founding the sorority Alpha Phi. If all of this wasn't enough, she would also assist in instructing exercise courses in the neighborhood during her leisure time. Though it's obvious that Allie was extremely busy and seldom found time for her friends and family, those close to her wonder how she managed to fit everything in. In addition, summer school was added to the list of things Allie had to complete. Recalling Allie's aspirations of going to college, her mother noted that in addition to envisioning herself forging a successful profession, Allie dreamed of finding her future spouse there. By the time she graduated, Allie was sure she would be able to find a compatible companion and settle down with a trustworthy man. When Allie stumbled upon student Brandon Thiesfeld in the fall of 2016, she thought she had finally met this man. Sadly, though, her sentiments weren't reciprocated. Although Allie's friends tried their best to warn her about Brandon, they claimed that his presence blinded Allie. Allie was pulled to him with a magnetic intensity for some reason, and she couldn't get him out of her head. Allie couldn't let him go, even though these feelings were regrettably far from reciprocal. Allie would discover a great deal about herself during the ensuing years, after realizing the lengths she would go to in order to keep Brandon in her life. Strangely enough, Allie and Brandon Thiesfeld didn't really cross paths on campus. Although she first met him in Fort Worth, Texas in 2016, she soon discovered he was a University of Mississippi student. This probably gave Allie the impression that their love was meant to be and that the stars were finally aligning. Sadly, though, this wasn't the case. Now, Allie most definitely was unaware of this at the time. However, everyone in her immediate vicinity was aware of Brandon's true nature. Brandon was one of the crowd members. At least among other males his age, he was well liked right away. In terms of women, however, once they found out about him, they would frequently turn away. However, Allie was an exception to that rule. She was unable to obtain enough. Numerous friends and acquaintances claimed that Brandon was, to put it mildly, an awful person. He was the epitome of what a piece of human waste could be. Allie's pals all remember him as a complete tool. He would never discuss anything but his father's wealth, and how he could do anything he wanted since his father would always come to his rescue. Whether what Brandon was doing was morally wrong or unlawful, it didn't matter. He would always do what he wanted, no matter who he wounded along the way. Speaking about Brandon, one of Allie's pals called him a pig, even though she desired to be anonymous. She added that he would have 6 different girlfriends with him at once, sit back and laugh at them, and use his family's money to do whatever he pleased. She concluded her criticism of Brandon by calling him extremely misogynistic. Similar memories of Brandon were shared by other friends. They claimed he had no respect for women at all and had grown up as a daddy's boy. For him, they were just objects to be played with. In the dorms, he would persistently harass any female that he encountered, according to one friend. After spending time with them and getting what he wanted from them, he would move on to the next one. Regretfully, it appears that Allie was also impacted by this. Allie was utterly enamored with Brandon. Allie believed that they had begun dating and that the two were exclusive in the beginning of their relationship. Allie's family, however, believes that she could not have been more mistaken. One day, when Allie had returned from college, her mother recalled, Allie had announced that she had met a boy, more precisely a lad from Texas. According to her mother, Allie has always had a fascination with Texas and Texans for whatever reason. She was therefore overjoyed to meet a boy who was from one of her favorite locations. At first, Allie thought of Brandon as just her crush, but it soon became apparent that they were much more than that. One of Allie's best friends, Maddie Norris, claims that she has never ever laid eyes on Brandon. Maddie claims that Brandon never seemed to have enough time to spend with Allie's friends and family. Allie could not stop thinking about Brandon, even though Maddie would later characterize their connection as on and off again. According to Allie's pals, Brandon repeatedly crushed her. She would continuously schedule things with him, but he would never arrive. She would ask her friends to meet him, but a few hours before the get-together, he would vanish. She would arrange phone conversations or dates, but he would never show up. In the summer of 2019, it all came to a head. Allie and Brandon had been somewhat involved with each other for roughly 3 years by this time. However, Allie then gave Brandon a shocking revelation. She might be pregnant, she told him in a text message. In addition, she included a picture of a pregnancy test that was deemed inconclusive. Allie was a senior in college at the time and intended to graduate the following spring in a matter of months. On June 14th at about 10:15 p.m., she told Brandon that she might be pregnant. Normally, when Allie stretched out to him, Brandon would try his hardest to duck and hide, but this time was different. Almost instantly, he replied, telling her to just take the Plan B medication and get on with her life. "I do not want a kid at all," he said, adding that he had no ambitions to raise a family. 2 minutes later, this was followed by another text that said, "No kid at all, I'm serious. It's going to wreck my life." Allie immediately scheduled a meeting with Brandon to discuss the alleged pregnancy, but guess what? He never showed up. She also set up several follow-up appointments, but he failed to appear at all of them. Every time he would make up an explanation saying he was busy, had other commitments, or had just forgotten. Brandon wouldn't actually get around to meeting Allie until July of that same year, but he had more in mind than just seeing her. He had a much darker secret and much grander aspirations. Once more, Allie and Brandon had agreed to get together on July 19, 2019 evening. Allie was supposed to be 3 months pregnant at this point, but strangely, the police discovered security tape from that evening, indicating she had been at a pub. She was driven home by herself after leaving the bar in an Uber, indicating that she had probably consumed alcohol. This occurred at 11:52 p.m. Believe it or not, Brandon really showed up for their scheduled appointment a few hours later at 1:28 a.m. After picking Allie up, they took a car down to Sardis Lake to a fishing camp. The two had been driving to the fishing camp while consuming junk food and White Claws, based on pictures collected at the scene of the crime. To be clear, this was happening while the two were acting under the false impression that Allie was pregnant. Additionally, White Claws are alcoholics, and junk food isn't good for babies. When the two got to the fishing camp at 2:15 a.m., people who lived nearby reported hearing many gunshots fired in the night. The bullets were heard by a woman walking her dog between 2:15 and 2:30 in the morning, which is almost exactly when Allie and Brandon would have arrived. A crime scene was discovered by a police officer who was passing through the area at 10:30 a.m. that same morning while on one of his regular patrols around the camp. He saw Allie lying face down on the ground when he arrived at the camp, according to the police officer's testimony and the photos taken at the murder scene. He discovered her pocketbook, 2 cans of White Claw, and the previously mentioned snack bag in close proximity. A jacket lay on an adjacent picnic table as well. Allie had been wounded by many rounds at a fairly close range, and it was evident when he got up close that she had died. After a closer look, the officer reported that Allie had been hit 9 times in total, even though 2 bullets were missing and 11 shell casings had been discovered nearby. The investigator claimed that he had never seen someone beat that frequently in all of his years in the military. After Allie's identification was established, the police started right to work on the investigation, speaking with her closest friends and relatives. They were especially intrigued by Allie's friends' testimonies. Detectives soon discovered that one name kept coming up in conversations after talking to a number of friends and acquaintances: Brandon Thiesfeld. Although Brandon was hard to find, the police were eventually able to contact him and asked him to come in for questioning. They only stated that they were interested in hearing his testimony from the night of the crime, as far as I can tell, not that he was a suspect. However, Brandon showed the same flagrant disregard for the police as he did for all the women in his life. At least 3 times he promised the cops he would meet them at a certain place and time, but he never did. After he lied a 3rd time, the police became considerably more concerned. They met with the judge, asked for a warrant for his arrest, and asked to see his cell phone data. The judge accepted this request, and Brandon's cell phone was used by the police to track his whereabouts. He was no longer even in the state of Mississippi, as they soon discovered. He had left without telling them, having packed his luggage and was traveling to Tennessee. This was obviously not going to work, and after he was issued a bolo for his truck, a $80,000 Ford F-150 that he had once again bought with his father's money, police were able to locate him. Brandon was taken into custody in Memphis just 2 hours after sending out the bolo. Things took a drastic turn for Brandon when the police searched his truck. He had been hiding a .40 caliber gun, which they discovered to be the same weapon that was used at the crime site. Even though Brandon was deported back to Mississippi right after, things will only get worse from here on out. Police asked for access to Allie's phone records while they were attempting to connect Brandon to the crime scene. Although they had undoubtedly located the weapon used in the killing, they had no apparent motive, which made it more difficult for a jury to find Brandon guilty. It wouldn't take them long to find a ton of evidence that was too strong to ignore. They were able to use Allie's location data, fitness data, and text messages when they started going through her Apple Watch and iPhone. This allowed them to create a very clear picture of when the incident occurred, how it unfolded, and what part Brandon had played in it. Through Apple iMessage, they were able to verify that Brandon was the last person to have seen Allie on the night she vanished. Furthermore, they were able to correlate their location data with the very same place at the precise same time. But the worst proof of all arrived next. They discovered via reading Allie's text conversations that she had been tricking Brandon into thinking she was pregnant and that the child belonged to him for 3 months. Naturally scared, Brandon refused to do the right thing and simply get together with Allie to discuss the situation and determine what part she wanted him to play in it all. It was quite obvious that Brandon didn't want kids. Allie persisted in pressuring him to discuss the options, though. Ultimately, Brandon took a snap decision that would permanently alter the course of his community's history. Authorities were able to demonstrate that Brandon chose to take Allie's life and the life of her unborn child out of fear that she would, quote, ruin his life. Or did he? Yes, he did indeed claim Allie's life. But during an autopsy on Allie's body, a startling discovery was made public. There was no proof that Allie was pregnant or had been in the recent past. What was the matter with the peculiar pregnancy test she presented to Brandon? Who knows, really? It appears like Allie was taking the pregnancy test as long as she could in the hopes of meeting Brandon, even though there are a million reasons why the results could be inconclusive. The problem is that we have no way of knowing if Allie was aware that she wasn't pregnant. If she was truly just playing him, there's no way for us to find out. What truly surprises me, though, is that she never bothered to take a follow-up pregnancy test to establish whether or not she was pregnant during the 3 months she thought she might be. However, in my opinion, her presence at the pub that evening and the discovery of White Claws at the crime site are the most important pieces of evidence demonstrating her knowledge that she was not pregnant. It was a bright girl, Allie. She most likely understood that she shouldn't be drinking if she was expecting. This seems to imply, in my opinion, that Allie was so utterly devoted to Brandon that she would have done almost anything to have a few minutes alone with him and work things out, but that Brandon was simply too much of a coward to take responsibility for his actions and just sit down and talk with her. The thing that worries me the most is that Brandon could have also pieced all of this together if he had half a brain. Rather than pursuing their connection, he made the decision to terminate his life. Allie had been putting in a lot of effort to earn her degree so she could start her ideal job. She had made a great effort to fall in love and start a life with someone, but sadly that someone was unable to love her in return. Allie had everything going for her, but this insane creature took everything away from her. Police discovered a handwritten note in which Brandon took ownership of his acts after he was arrested. In the note, which was addressed to his parents, he expressed his regret for his actions and the suffering they had endured. He clarified that in the years preceding the incident, he had been experiencing troubling ideas. He claimed he had no idea where these thoughts had originated from, but that he had ultimately followed through on them, and that he sincerely regretted doing so. In the end, Brandon received a life sentence with the chance of release upon reaching the age of 65. It appears that Brandon had finally committed a felony for which his father was unable to provide a bail.
Hey, thanks for sticking with us today. Check out this other thrilling videos for you to watch, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe and like button, and let us know down below your thoughts on today's case. Until then, take care.